Welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are dealing with the subject course Economic and Financial Administration. The subject coordinator for this course is Professor I. Ramabrahmam and the paper coordinator is Professor Sanjeev Mahajan. I am Dr. Geetendra Kaur, Assistant Professor from Department of Public Administration, Punjabi University, Patiala. I'll be dealing with the topic Enactment of Budget. The module that I'm going to discuss today will help the students to understand various stages of the enactment of the budget in India, the appropriation bill, the finance bill, and the other grants that are granted by the parliament. We will also be discussing the constitutional provisions relating to the enactment of budget in India. To begin with, I would say that we need to know what is budget. Actually, the word budget nowhere stands in the constitution. Our founding fathers never used this word. The word that they used was annual financial statement. Annual financial statement is the estimated receipts and expenditure of the Government of India for a financial year that begins on the 1st of April and ends on the 31st March of the following year. Now, why do we need a annual financial statement to be passed by the Lok Sabha? Because it is a constitutional obligation. Under Article 112 of the Constitution, the annual financial statement has been defined as well as a provision has been made for its enactment. The word enactment means the passage or the approval of the budget by the parliament and the ratification by the president. This approval by the Lok Sabha is very important because unless it is made, the government cannot spend the money nor collect the taxes. For the budget to be enacted in the parliament, it has to pass through various stages. It has to pass through 6 stages, namely presentation of budget, general discussion, scrutiny by departmental standing committees, voting on demands for grants, passing of appropriation bill, and the passing of finance bill. The first stage is the presentation of the budget. Rule 213 of the Lok Sabha provides for the presentation of the budget in 2 or more parts, and every part is to be treated like any independent budget. Accordingly, the budget is presented in 2 parts, the railway budget and the general budget. The railway budget deals with the finances of the railways, while the general budget gives an overall view of the financial position of the Government of India. The railway budget is presented by the railway minister and the general budget is presented by the finance minister. The introduction of the railway budget precedes that of the general budget. The introduction of railway budget precedes that of the general budget. Normally, the railway budget is presented somewhere in the 3rd week of the February, while the general budget is presented on the last working day of the February. It is very important to mention here that from 2017, the general budget and the railway budget has been merged. So now we will see that in the year 2017, a single budget containing the demands of the railway budget as well as of the general budget will be presented. The budget is presented on the day as fixed by the President. After the presentation of the budget, 3 statements under the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003 are laid on the table of the House. These 3 statements are the Medium-Term Fiscal Policy Statement, the Fiscal Policy Strategy Statement, and the Macroeconomic Framework Statement. While presenting the general budget in the Lok Sabha, the Finance Minister makes a speech introducing the budget, known as budget speech. This budget speech is eagerly waited by the common man because at the end of the speech, there are fresh taxation proposals and variations in the existing tax proposals also. At the end of the budget speech in the Lok Sabha, budget is laid before the table of Rajya Sabha. The Finance Minister also introduces the finance bill having financial proposals. There is no discussion in the House on this day as provided in the Rule 205, Rule of Procedure and Conduct of Business in Lok Sabha. Along with the budget, many other documents are presented in the Lok Sabha, which are explanatory memorandum on the budget, an appropriation bill, finance bill containing tax proposals, the economic classification of budget, and annual reports of the various ministries. The second stage is the general discussion. The general discussion on the budget begins after a few days of its presentation. It takes place in both the houses of the parliament and lasts usually for 3 to 4 days. Discussion is confined to general examination of the budget as a whole or any question of principle involved therein. Members usually discuss the general aspect of the fiscal and economic policy of the government and do not go into the details of the expenditure and taxation. At this stage, no cut motion is moved and Even budget is not submitted for the vote of the House. But at the end of the general discussion, the Finance Minister makes a general reply. The third stage is scrutiny by departmental committees. After the general discussion, both the houses are adjourned for a fixed period of time, normally 2 to 3 weeks. And during this time, 17 departmental standing committees examine and discuss in detail the demands for grants of the concerned ministries. The standing committee consists of 45 members, 30 from Lok Sabha and 15 from Rajya Sabha. The reports prepared by the committees are submitted to both the houses for consideration within the specified time. Well, this kind of scrutiny by the committees came in the year 1993, and it has made the parliamentary financial control over the ministries much more detailed, close, in-depth and comprehensive. The fourth stage is voting on demands for grants. This is the most important stage in the enactment of the budget. To understand this stage, we should know first what are demands. Demands are the units of appropriation which require a vote of the House. A demand becomes a grant only after it has been duly voted by the House. The demands are presented ministry-wise, and in the general budget, we have a total of 109 demands, out of which 103 belong to the civil area, 6 to the defense, while the railway budget has only 32 demands. Regarding the voting pattern, the voting of demands is the exclusive privilege of the Lok Sabha. Rajya Sabha cannot vote. Voting is confined to the expenditure part of the budget, and the expenditure charged on the Consolidated Fund of India is not submitted to vote. The time for the discussion and voting on demands for grants is allocated by the Speaker in consultation with the Leader of the House. Normally, 26 days are allotted for this purpose. During voting on demands for grants, members have the full right to criticize the budgetary provisions and make suggestions for improving the financial position. A very important development during the voting on demands for grants is the cut motions. As discussed earlier, the demands for grants have to be made in the form of motions. The motions to reduce the amounts of grants for grants are called cut motions. Cut motions are classified into 3 categories: policy cut, economy cut, and token cut motion. Well, these cut motions are the tools to initiate discussion on demands for grants, and they're very helpful in upholding the principle of responsible government by probing into the activities of the government. We'll discuss the cut motions now. The first is the policy cut motion. This motion represents the disapproval of the policy underlying the demand. When this motion is introduced in the Lok Sabha, it says that the amount of demand be reduced to ₹1, and the member giving such a notice has to give precise reasons for such a cut. The second motion is economy cut motion. This motion means that a member of the Lok Sabha would like to reduce the expenditure by making a specific cut in the grant demanded. This form of motion is introduced in the Lok Sabha in the following manner: that amount of demand be reduced to rupees. Well, the amount suggested for reduction may be either a lump sum reduction in demand, or omission, or reduction of an item in the demand. The third and a very popular cut motion that is being resorted by the members of the parliament is the token cut motion. The aim of this motion is to voice a very particular grievance for which the Government of India is responsible. The motion says the amount of the demand be reduced to ₹100. Once the discussion have taken place and the cut motions are disposed of, the demands for grants are put to the vote in the House. The normal practice is that all the demands for grants are put to the vote in the House. But there is one practice that is being followed in the Lok Sabha, and that practice, that device is known as guillotine. What happens is that on the last day, that is the 26th day of the allotted days for the discussion and voting on demand for grants, at the appointed time, the Speaker puts all the remaining demands to vote and disposes them whether they have been discussed by members or not. This practice is known as guillotine. And when the guillotine concludes, it also ends the discussion on demands for grants. The next stage is the passing of appropriation bill. We need to understand what is appropriation bill first. Appropriation bill consists of all the demands that have been voted in the Lok Sabha and the expenditure charged on the Consolidated Fund of India. This bill is introduced in the Lok Sabha to fulfill the constitutional obligation of Article 114, which says, no money shall be withdrawn from the Consolidated Fund of India except under the appropriation by law. This is a mandatory provision and it needs to be followed. This bill is like any other money bill, and after being passed by the Lok Sabha, it is certified as money bill by the Speaker and then sent to the Rajya Sabha. Well, it is worth mentioning here that no amendments can be made in this bill in the House to vary the amount of the expenditure charged on Consolidated Fund of India. Rajya Sabha can make recommendations over the bill but cannot amend or reject it. The appropriation bill becomes Appropriation Act after it is given assent by the President of India. By becoming the Appropriation Act, it authorizes the government to appropriate expenditure from the Consolidated Fund of India. Another stage, and the most important stage, that is the last stage, is the passing of Finance Bill. Let's understand what is Finance Bill. Finance Bill incorporates all the financial proposals of the government for the following year. But it is introduced in the Lok Sabha every year after the budget is presented. Unlike the Appropriation Bill, the amendments seeking to reject or reduce a tax can be moved in case of Finance Bill. This bill has to be considered and passed by the Parliament and given assent by the President within 75 days after its introduction. The Speaker certifies this bill also as the money bill, and after being passed by majority in the Lok Sabha, it is referred to Rajya Sabha, who can only make recommendations. After the ratification by the Rajya Sabha, the bill goes to the President for its assent. And after the assent of the President of India, the Finance Bill becomes an act which legalizes the income side of the budget. That is, now the government is authorized to collect the taxes government is authorized to collect the taxes. The passage of Appropriation Bill and the Finance Bill in the Lok Sabha completes the process of budget enactment. Now, the Appropriation Act and the Finance Act together constitute the annual financial statement, popularly known as budget. Now, we will discuss the various kinds of grants that are made by the Parliament under extraordinary or special circumstances besides budget. Well, budget is a grant that is given to the Government of India annually. But there are some circumstances where special types of grants are needed. To name a few: supplementary grants, vote on account, vote on credit, excess grant, exceptional grant, additional grant, and token grant. We will discuss each one of them separately. First is supplementary grant. Supplementary grant is granted when the amount authorized by the Parliament through the Appropriation Act for a particular service for the current financial year is found to be insufficient, or when a need has arisen for any additional expenditure. The procedure is same for both the Appropriation Act and the Supplementary Act. The next grant is vote on account. This is generally taken by the Government of India during the time of elections. The Lok Sabha has the power to make any grants in advance in respect of the estimated expenditure for a part of the financial year, pending the voting on demands for grants and the passage of the Appropriation Bill. This provision that is made by Lok Sabha is known as vote on account. It is passed or granted after the general discussion on budget is over. It is generally granted for 2 months and an amount equivalent to 1/6 of the total estimation is granted. Another popular grant is vote on credit. It is granted for meeting an unexpected demand upon the resources of India when, on account of the magnitude or the indefinite character of the service, the demand cannot be stated with details ordinarily given in the budget. Now we discuss the excess grant. It is granted when the money has been spent on any service during a financial year in excess of the amount granted for that service in the budget for that year. It is voted by the Lok Sabha after the financial year. Before the demands for excess grants are submitted to the Lok Sabha for voting, they must be approved by the Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament. There are two grants known as exceptional grants and additional grants which meet the unforeseen situations. First is the exceptional grant. It is granted for a special purpose and forms no part of the current service of any financial year, while the additional grant is granted when a need has arisen during the current financial year for additional expenditure upon some new service not contemplated in the budget for that year. Then the last grant that we'll discuss is the token grant. It is granted when the funds to meet the proposed expenditure on a new service can be made available by reappropriation. A demand for the grant of token sum of ₹1 is submitted to the vote of the Lok Sabha, and if assented, funds are made available. The last part of our discussion will deal with the constitutional provisions relating to the enactment of budget. Now, there are certain articles of the Constitution of India which contains provisions relating to the enactment of budget. The articles are Article 112, Article 113, Article 114, Article 115, Article 116, Article 117, Article 265, Article 266, Article 267, and Article 275. We will deal with these articles one by one. To begin with, Article 112, which states about the annual financial statement. It provides that in respect of every financial year, the President shall cause to be laid before both the Houses of Parliament a statement of the estimated receipts and expenditure of the Government of India for that year, referred to as the annual financial statement. The estimates of expenditure shall show separately expenditure charged upon the Consolidated Fund of India and other expenditure that is voted proposed to be made from the Consolidated Fund of India. The annual financial statement shall also distinguish between the expenditure on revenue account from other, that is capital expenditure. Article 113 relates to the procedure in Parliament with respect to the estimates. It says that estimates relating to expenditure charged upon the Consolidated Fund of India shall not be submitted to the vote of Parliament, even though these can be discussed in either of the House of Parliament. The estimates relating to the voted portion shall be submitted in the form of demands for grants, and the House of the People shall have the power to assent, refuse, or reduce the amount specified therein. Under this article, no demand for a grant shall be made except on the recommendations of the President of India. Article 114 deals with the appropriation bill. After the passing of the demands under Article 113, the appropriation bill is introduced in the Lok Sabha to provide for the appropriation out of the Consolidated Fund of India to meet the requirements relating to, firstly, the grants so made by the House of the People and the expenditure charged on the Consolidated Fund of India, but not exceeding in any case the amount shown in the statement previously laid before the Parliament. Further, subject to the provisions of Articles 115 and 116, no money shall be withdrawn from the Consolidated Fund of India except under the appropriation made by a law passed in accordance with the provisions of this article. The appropriation bill is important in the sense because it authorizes the government to appropriate expenditure from the Consolidated Fund of India. Article 115 relates to supplementary, additional or excess grant, and Article 116 relates to vote on account, vote on credit, and exceptional grants. These topics, these areas have been dealt in the discussion earlier. So we will move on to the next article, that is Article 117. This article deals with the special provisions with respect to the financial bills. It states, a bill or an amendment making provision for any of the matters specified in the subclauses A to F of Clause 1 of Article 110 shall not be introduced or moved except on the recommendation of the President, and a bill making such a provision shall not be introduced in the Council of States. Article 265 is also important because it makes a provision that no tax shall be levied or collected except by an authority of law. Article 266 relates with the Consolidated Funds and the public accounts of India and of the states. Subject to the provisions of Article 267 and to the provisions of this chapter with respect to the assignment of the whole or part of the net proceeds of certain taxes and duties to states, all revenues received by the Government of India, all loans raised, and all monies received by that government in repayment of loans shall form one consolidated fund to be entitled as the Consolidated Fund of India, and all revenues received by the government of a state, all loans raised, and all monies received by that government in repayment of loans shall form one consolidated fund to be entitled the Consolidated Fund of the state. All other public monies received by, on behalf of the Government of India or the Government of State shall be credited to the public account of India or the public account of the state as the case may be. No monies out of the Consolidated Fund of India or the Consolidated Fund of a state shall be appropriated except in accordance with law and for the purposes and in the manner provided in this Constitution. Article 267 talks about the Contingency Fund of India. It says, Parliament may, by law, establish a contingency fund in the nature of an imprest to be entitled the Contingency Fund of India, into which shall be paid from time to time such sums as may be determined by such law, and the said fund shall be placed at the disposal of the President to enable advances to be made him out of such fund for the purposes of meeting unforeseen expenditure, pending authorization of such expenditure by Parliament by law under Article 115 or Article 116. Similarly, the legislature of a state may, by law, establish a contingency fund in the nature of an imprest to be entitled the Contingency Fund of the State. Article 275 is regarding the grants from the Union to certain states. It says, such sums as the Parliament may by law provide shall be charged on the Consolidated Fund of India in each year as the grants in aid of the revenues of such state as the Parliament may determine to be in need of assistance, and different sums may be fixed for different states, provided that after a finance commission has been constituted, no order shall be made under this clause by the President except after considering the recommendations of the Finance Commission. Besides these articles, the Constitution of India has also defined the relative roles or position of both the Houses of Parliament with regard to the enactment of the budget. That is, the annual financial statement in the following ways. Firstly, a money bill or a finance bill dealing with taxation cannot be introduced in the Rajya Sabha. It must be introduced only in the Lok Sabha, which is the House of the People. Secondly, the Rajya Sabha has no power to vote on the demand for grants. It is the exclusive privilege of the Lok Sabha. Thirdly, the Rajya Sabha should return the money bill or the finance bill to the Lok Sabha within 14 days. It is mandatory for the Rajya Sabha to do this. The Lok Sabha can either accept or reject the recommendations made by the Rajya Sabha in this regard. So we see that with regard to budget enactment, the House of the People holds a superior position than the Rajya Sabha. To conclude, I would say that the enactment of budget is the most significant stage in the entire budgetary process because it not only upholds the principle of parliamentary financial control, but it also legalizes the receipts and expenditures from the Consolidated Fund of India. I also feel that it prompts the central government to maintain fiscal discipline and boost economic growth of the country. Thank you.